Chapter 5 addresses the theme of suffering, highlighting the different ways in which it can be understood and experienced, especially from the Spiritist perspective, which suggests that resignation and altruism can transform pain into a spiritual experience of evolution. The chapter begins with a reflection on divine providence, suggesting that, even in the most critical moments, God can reserve unexpected means of salvation. This leads us to understand that although suffering is an inevitable part of human existence, divine intervention can arise at the most unexpected moment, deflecting the fatal blow and offering an opportunity for redemption. This can occur in unanticipated ways, such as when a human being finds a way of salvation even when faced with imminent death. The test of faith is often pushed to the limit, but there is always a possibility of divine mercy. Suffering, when experienced with acceptance and resignation, can be beneficial not only for the individual who experiences it, but also for others. The text suggests that, by accepting suffering with faith and patience, the individual not only evolves spiritually, but also offers an example of moral strength and faith to those around him. This example can have a positive impact on others, inducing them to deal with their own trials in a more resilient way, avoiding despair and the destructive consequences that can come from losing hope. Suffering can become beneficial in two main ways. Materially, when a person, through their efforts, sacrifices and work, contributes to the material well-being of others. Suffering imposed by necessity and work, such as poverty or caring for others, has the power to benefit society. And morally, when the individual offers an example of submission to God's will, which can inspire others to practice resignation and strengthen their own faith. The morality of suffering lies not only in what one suffers, but in the way one reacts to it, with an attitude of acceptance and trust in divine providence. Resignation should not be confused with passivity or apathy. It is the active acceptance of the divine will, recognizing that suffering has a purpose that goes beyond the immediate understanding of human beings. It is an attitude of trust that, even in the midst of pain, God is leading the spirit towards the path of evolution and purification. This resignation is presented as a way to achieve spiritual virtues, such as patience, humility, and trust, fundamental for spiritual growth. The person who suffers with resignation not only rises spiritually, but also contributes to the good of others, being a beacon of hope and faith in times of difficulty. Suffering, in addition to being an opportunity for personal growth, is also intrinsically linked to the practice of charity. Charity, understood not only as material donation, but as an exercise of love, altruism, and solidarity, is a way to alleviate the suffering of others. Those who suffer, but who have the ability to help and alleviate the pain of others, experience a form of suffering that is also an act of charity. By alleviating the suffering of others, even in situations of personal pain, human beings reflect divine love and follow the example of Christ. This type of suffering is blessed because, instead of being a selfish act or complaint, it becomes an action aimed at the collective good, and, therefore, spiritually and morally enriching. Suffering, when understood and accepted within the perspective of Spiritist faith, becomes an opportunity for evolution and service to others. Suffering is not a divine punishment, but a form of purification, learning, and an opportunity for spiritual evolution, both for the individual and for society. Resignation, patience, faith, and charity are the virtues that must be cultivated during moments of pain, as they are what enable the transformation of suffering into a blessing, not only for those who experience it, but also for those who are touched by the example of courage and faith of the sufferer. The text reflects on the sadness that fills the hearts of some people, associating this melancholy with the struggle of the spirit that, trapped in the body, seeks freedom and happiness. It is emphasized that, although the spirit aspires for a better life, true happiness is not found in this world, but in carrying out a life mission designated by God. The doctrine questions the legitimacy of seeking voluntary suffering to increase personal trials and expiations. It is taught that we must accept with faith and without complaints the tests that God sends us, but never seek to aggravate the pain out of pure selfishness or fanaticism. True virtue is not in inflicting suffering on oneself, but in accepting adversity with courage and, when possible, seeking to help others. Although everyone is on earth to atone, charity and love for others must be practiced, seeking to alleviate the suffering of others, in accordance with the law of love. The role of the Spiritist is to be an instrument of consolation, not of worsening suffering. The issue of terminal suffering is raised, questioning whether it would be lawful to shorten the life of a terminally ill person to spare them anguish. The text teaches that, despite suffering, no one should take upon themselves the right to decide the moment of death, as God, in His infinite mercy, can grant precious moments of reflection and repentance until the last breath. The issue of sacrificing life is also discussed, especially in contexts of war or to serve a cause. The text warns that, although true devotion lies in not fearing death when it becomes necessary, seeking death in a premeditated way is always an act of suicide, an illusion that death can serve some purpose. When someone exposes themselves to great danger to save another person, without the intention of dying, the act is not considered suicide, but rather a gesture of selflessness and love for others. Suffering is a consequence of the spirit being trapped in the physical body. Although the spirit aspires to freedom and happiness, it often finds itself powerless in the face of earthly reality, which leads to sadness and melancholy. However, resistance to these sensations and acceptance of life's difficulties are seen as essential elements for spiritual strengthening. The text also addresses the issue of voluntary suffering. The moral presented is that one should not seek suffering for oneself, but when the suffering is for the good of others, as an act of charity, it is blessed. The pursuit of personal suffering without purpose is seen as selfishness, but when it is for the benefit of others, as in the case of caring for the sick or helping those in need, there is great merit. In relation to the suffering of others, the text emphasizes that we must help alleviate the trials of our fellow human beings, without, however, interfering with the trials that God has prepared for them. We must be instruments of consolation and relief, without trying to increase or prolong the suffering of others, as this is seen as an error that goes against divine plans. The issue of shortening a patient's life is approached with caution. Even in desperate situations, such as in the case of a terminally ill person, the text highlights that no one should make hasty decisions about the end of life. Suffering, no matter how intense, can be transformative, and the last hour can be an opportunity for reflection and repentance that can positively influence the future of the spirit. Death on a battlefield or in extreme situations is also discussed. The message is that death should be seen as a possible sacrifice in the name of a greater good, but should not be sought intentionally. True sacrifice lies in fearlessly facing death when it presents itself, especially when it comes to serving others. Finally, suffering accepted with resignation is not only for one's own benefit, but can be of great benefit to others. The example of faith and submission to God's will can inspire others to resign themselves to, avoiding despair and suicide, for example, and bringing moral benefits to everyone around them. These teachings reinforce the idea that difficulties and suffering are essential parts of spiritual evolution and must be faced with courage, faith, and generosity, both for the good of oneself and for the good of others. Have you ever reflected on the true meaning of suffering and how it can transform us? In this video, we explore how divine providence acts in our lives and how we can face adversity with faith. If you like the content, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Together, we can grow spiritually and become stronger on life's journey.